God. My friends, this is another chapter in American history of humiliation, of a failure of leadership, and all of that, of course, is no better epitomized and symbolized than by what happened when the Iranians captured two American vessels that happened to stray into their territorial waters. Now, everybody should know that when a ship goes into another country's territorial waters, the first thing they do is go out and guide them out of it. It is against international law to take them at gunpoint. All over the world, but particularly all over the Middle East, is the picture of American servicemen and one woman on their knees with Iranian Revolutionary Guard holding their automatic weapons on them. An incredible act of arrogance and humiliation for our American sailors. Let me just tell you what is really the most aggravating thing about it was the response after this totally unlawful action, humiliation of American service members, the sailors, and the response to the administration was, and I'm not making this up, White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest said the sailors were offered, quote, the proper courtesy that you would expect, unquote. Being held at gunpoint on their knees with their hands behind their neck is, in the words of the White House press secretary, the proper courtesy that you would expect. The Secretary of State, John Kerry, offered his, quote, gratitude to Iranian authorities for their cooperation in swiftly resolving this matter. That's the American Secretary of State. After gross violation of international law, our American servicemen are put on their knees by a bunch of two-bit Iranians. Vice President Joe Biden described the incident as, quote, standard nautical practice. The Vice President of the United States says that when you put Americans on their knees and point weapons at them with evil intention, that's standard nautical practice. What planet has the Vice President of the United States been on? And now to cap it all off, this week, Iranian Ayatollah Khomeini pinned the Order of Fath Medal to the chests of those that mistreated and humiliated American personnel. I repeat, these people were given awards and medals by the Ayatollah Khomeini administration, has still failed to condemn Iran's behavior for what it was, a violation of international law and centuries of maritime tradition. According to a recent article in the Navy Times, legal experts all agree that this hostile incident represents a gross violation of international law. So I asked my friend from South Carolina, is there any explanation that could possibly be understood about this act of violation of international law, of humiliation of American service members? There's only one reason, and that is they don't want to upset the Iranians. They don't want to disturb the $100 billion or so that's going to the Iranians as we speak while they buy weapons and toys all over Europe. And so here we have now seen American service personnel put on their knees with guns at their heads, and the heads, most important people in our government, praise the Iranians for their action. I would ask my friend, how else could you explain the not passivity but absolute endorsement by the Vice President of the United States and the Secretary of State for this kind of humiliating behavior?
Well, I think thank you, Senator McCain. I think it's a disconnection from reality, trying to shape a reality that does not exist. One, can you imagine your good friend Ronald Reagan, if he had been president, what the Iranians would have done?
Could I remind my colleague that some of our colleagues may not recall that the day that Ronald Reagan was sworn in as President of the United States, the hostages that were being held in our embassy in Iran came home.
Yeah, so this is really about respect for the Obama administration, John Kerry, and everybody else in our government. The Iranians did this, I think, Senator McCain, for one reason: to show the region that they're not intimidated by the United States.
Or they can intimidate the United States.
Right, that they can test our resolve. They do it all the time. They fired 2 missile tests in violation of existing UN resolutions. The Obama administration hasn't done anything about it. They captured 2 boats. These were lightly armored naval vessels with 2 50 caliber machine guns. I think one of them became disabled, and they drifted into Iranian waters. The Iranians reacted as if this is some kind of invasion by America. They humiliated these sailors. Instead of standing up for our naval personnel, basically we thank the Iranians for being so nice to people that they captured at gunpoint in violation of international law. But it goes to a deeper point. The Iranians are letting everybody in the region know they're not changing their behavior. That this nuclear deal, don't mistake us having a nuclear agreement with a behavior change. That the Ayatollah and his henchmen are still in charge. They're not part of the family of nations. Since the deal has been signed, they fired missiles in violation of UN resolutions. They're on the ground helping the butcher of Damascus. The Iranians are still the largest state sponsor of terrorism, and this is just the cherry on top of all that misbehavior. But one thing I do want to talk about, and I'll get your view of this because you're so knowledgeable, is that Syria. Syria is literally hell on earth. 250,000 people have been slaughtered in Syria by Bashar Assad and his regime. Those people who took to the streets during the Arab Spring in Damascus were from all different backgrounds and all different sects. They wanted to live in a country not run by Assad in such a brutal fashion. His response to their plea for better transparency, democracy, economic opportunity was literally to shoot them down. Now we have an all-out war in Syria. The radical Islamic groups have moved into Syria. The Caliphate's headquarters in Syria of ISIL. It has been the biggest misjudgment since Munich by this administration. They had Assad on the ropes 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and they didn't act, and what you see today is a result of a failure to act. But here's what I find astonishing. The Syrian people who are being slaughtered by the thousands are being asked by the United States government to sit down with Assad and negotiate an end to this war. The Russians and the Iranians are all in for Bashar Assad. The people we have trained to replace Assad have been killed by the Russian president. Our president hasn't lifted a finger. And now you got the Secretary of State basically browbeating the Syrian opposition to go to Geneva and enter into peace talks with Bashar Assad, who's in full control of his part of Syria. I just can't believe that we would do this to the Syrian people. The Syrian opposition calls Senator McCain. Now, this says a lot about you, my friend. They were calling Senator McCain to pass on a message. You have been our best friend. We're not going to sit down and talk with Assad until the UN resolutions calling for his removal have been honored. Our government wants a deal in Syria, regardless of the quality of it, to say they stopped the war on their watch. They are now asking the Syrian people basically to kowtow to the man who's killed their families. This deal with Iran is a nightmare for the region. You've given the Iranian Ayatollah a pathway to a bomb, even if he doesn't cheat, a missile to deliver the bomb, and money to pay for it all. And now they want to take this same negotiating team into Syria and lock in place Bashar Assad's regime, who has slaughtered the Syrian people, give the Russians and Iranians a foothold in Damascus through negotiations that they could never have dreamed of a year ago. Senator McCain, what do you think the consequence will be of any peace agreement as long as the Russians and the Iranians are supporting Assad and we're indifferent to the Syrian opposition in terms of their military needs?